What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome back to First Time, Long Time. I'm Colin Nubian, 97.5 The Fanatic and 93.3 WMMR. Coming to you weekly with Philly Sports Talk. And I got an interesting topic for you this week. The NHL is bringing back some international best-on-best hockey.
And a name on the front is a hell of a lot more important than the one on the back. Get that through your head. Again.
Nothing like that to get you jacked up. But we got the NHL Four Nations Face-Off coming up in February, and the teams were named this week. The countries, Team USA, Team Canada, Finland, and Sweden chose their rosters on Monday, so a lot of the names have already been leaked when you're hearing this. But the official rosters will come out on Wednesday, the day after recording. We pretty much already know that Travis Sanheim, Travis Konechny, and Rasmus Ristolainen are the three Flyers involved. You also got John Tortorella as an assistant coach on the Team USA staff. But the Four Nations face-off is going to be an international best-on-best. Remember, this hasn't happened since 2016, and it's going to be a round robin between those four countries, US, Canada, Sweden, Finland. And the two best teams in that round robin are going to advance to a one-game final. These games are all at the Bell Center in Montreal and TD Garden, home of the Boston Bruins. And the world is starved for this. The appetite for international hockey hasn't gone away. It's just the participation that's gone away. The NHL hasn't sent players to the Winter Olympics since 2014 now. Remember, they backed out of the 2018 Olympics, and then COVID-19 kind of pushed them out of China in 2022. Yeah, it did have the World Cup of Hockey in 2016, but that really didn't provide the same level of intensity that international rivalries of the past have given hockey fans for a very long time. But the league and the Players Association have finally come to an agreement that allows these guys to play for their countries. And if you look at the biggest superstars in the league, like Connor McDavid and Nathan McKinnon, they're going to play for Team Canada really for the first time in a best-on-best. Same with Austin Matthews for Team USA and Jack Eichel for Team USA. These are the big-time faces of the NHL, and they're going to get to go on the international stage. They are considering this somewhat of a warm-up to the 2026 Winter Olympics, and the new CBA for the NHL is also going to allow players to participate in the 2030 Olympics. One unfortunate part of this situation, the Four Nations face-off, well, obviously there's more than four nations in this world that play hockey. Russia, you got one of the best countries in the world at producing hockey talent. They're not going to get a fair opportunity. That's a situation that has more to do with world politics than it does the IIHF, but Russia's not going to be able to participate. I don't expect to see them in either of those two Olympic Games that I just mentioned also, 2026 and 2030. But if you look at Czechia and Slovakia and any other nations, Germany, Belarus, and any smaller international programs, they're not going to compete in the NHL Four Nations face-off in 2025. They will have a chance to qualify for the Olympics down the road. But for now, you're going to stick to those top four. You're going to get USA, Canada, Sweden, and Finland. And me personally, I'm really excited for this. I know a lot of the media covering the NHL has not really given the best reception to this tournament. But even if it is somewhat of a warm-up to the 2026 Olympics, I'm going to watch it intently because international best-on-best hockey is such a part of the history of the game that I don't even think a lot of modern fans realize that, especially in the past 10 years since the last Olympics, when all you've had is that kind of underwhelming World Cup of Hockey 8 years ago. But if you look back, there's so many great memories that you can draw on in the history of the game. You had the 1972 Summit Series. That was between the Soviets and the Canadians. That's, of course, the one that Flyers fans probably hear about most because Bobby Clarke notoriously turned that series around with a slash that may or may not have intentionally injured Valery Kharlamov of the Soviet team. And if you've heard that name before, that's the same guy that Ed Van Impe crushed 4 years later to send the Soviet Red Army team off the ice at the Spectrum. So that guy has a place in Flyers history. But after that 72 Summit Series, you had the 1980 Olympics, the Miracle on Ice. You had the Canada Cup. There were, I believe, 5 of those. Yeah, that was 1976, 81, 84, 87, and 91. And those really skyrocketed international hockey into such a big deal. And for bragging rights for the best hockey players in the world, superstars of the NHL once the international game grew. And there was also another nugget I stumbled onto back when I was with the Hockey Writers a couple of years ago. That was Rendezvous 87 that the NHL held in Quebec City. Instead of the NHL All-Star Game in 1987, the league had the Russian team come over and play the NHL All-Stars. Yeah, that's something that would never happen now, by the way. So when I stumbled onto it, I thought it was a great novelty to look into. But it was a 2-game series. The Russians took one, and the NHL team took one. But everybody involved was very happy with the logistics and how everything turned out. So I thought that was something good to throw in. Rendezvous 87. If you don't know that story, definitely look it up on the Hockey Writers under my name. But then if you fast forward into my lifetime, you had the NHL's participation in the Olympics, and that started in 1998 over in Nagano, Japan, the Winter Olympic Games. It was a little bit of a bummer for American hockey fans. Team USA didn't do well over there, but headed into those Olympics too, the first ones with NHL players participating, you would have thought that Canada was just going to wreck everybody. Their roster was absolutely loaded, but they didn't. They lost the gold medal game to the Czechs, and of course that's the infamous game where Wayne Gretzky did not shoot in the shootout of the gold medal game. Controversial coaching decision. So the Czechs with Jágr, Hasek, those guys won. And I read a great summary of the Nagano Olympics over the summer. It was Sean McIndoe, Down Goes Brown, if you want to call him that, works for The Athletic. But he published his book, The History of the Game, and did great detail about the international game, but called the Nagano Olympics and the World Cup of 1996 somewhat of an appetizer for the 2002 Olympics in Salt Lake City. Because with Nagano, a lot of these games were aired in North America on tape delay, just with the time difference from Japan and the travel difficulties that some of these players had going over. It was somewhat of a warm-up. And then when you had Salt Lake City 4 years later, things were a little bit different. Americans and Canadians were watching this on primetime television. And, of course, Team USA and Canada advanced to the gold medal game in 2002, with the Canadians ultimately coming out on top. But in those early Olympic years, I remember Team USA having Jeremy Roenick and Mike Modano. Keith Tkachuk was on there. John LeClaire was playing for those teams. Billy Guerin. And those were some of the guys that I idolized as a little kid, first becoming a hockey fan back then. So that was the 98, 02, and really 06 Olympic teams. Also, they had most of that group. So those guys really developed into stars, grew American hockey. It was not nearly as big as it is today, with Team USA being a legitimate rival to Team Canada and just a slight underdog in the Four Nations face-off. And I think one instance that made that possible in the modern game, a real turning point for Team USA, I think it was the 2010 Olympics. And that was probably the highlight of international hockey for me. What I consider the best hockey game I've ever watched was that gold medal game in Vancouver in 2010, where Canada beat Team USA. But for the Americans, they kind of had a new crop of players on that team. Jamie Langdon-Bruner was their captain, and he was really one of the only veterans. But you had Patrick Kane. He was the big one. It was a new addition to the team. He was just coming into superstardom in the NHL. They got Phil Kessel on that team, Joe Pavelski, TJ Oshie, all these guys. And Ryan Miller also was the goalie. He actually won the MVP of that 2010 tournament, even though Team USA won the silver medal. Canada was also, they're loaded pretty much every season and at every Olympics. They have their pick of the litter for skill players, checkers, defensemen, you name it. You can find pretty much anything if you look at the talent pool of Canadian NHL players. And they won that gold medal game in overtime off the stick of Sidney Crosby. But, God, I remember how hard the Americans fought. Zach Parise scored that goal in the final minute to tie it and send it to OT. You really thought Team USA had a chance. And specific to this area, where Flyers fans can't stand Sidney Crosby, to see that goal come off of his stick was absolutely egregious. You just couldn't help but throw your face into your hands in shock and disbelief. But God, was I stunned years later when I actually heard Sidney Crosby do an interview with Barstool. He said he attributes that goal to a drill he had done for years in his own personal training. Before he left the ice in certain individual sessions, he would take a full bucket of hockey pucks and dump it around the zone, all within the blue line. He would not leave the ice until every single one of those hockey pucks was shot in the net. The purpose of that exercise, be able to hit the net from anywhere, and that's exactly what Sidney Crosby did on the biggest stage of his international hockey career in overtime of the gold medal game in Vancouver on Canadian soil to defeat Team USA. So that was a heartbreaker for a younger version of myself watching hockey, but I do consider it the best hockey game I've ever watched, especially from a less intense standpoint, like the way I watch the Flyers. So this Four Nations face-off, it should be fun for all hockey fans. Again, this is February 12th through 20th. The tournament's going to run. Team USA and Canada are going to kick off first, and Sweden and Finland are going to kick off against each other also. So you kind of have the international rivalries lined up. But again, the round robin is going to determine who gets to that final game. So I think this is something to look forward to, some excitement for Flyers fans. On Team USA, you got Austin Matthews and Eichel. You got the Tkachuk brothers, the Hughes brothers too. Adam Fox on the blue line. He's probably going to be one of their top defensemen. Connor Hellebuck in net, and that's a big advantage they have over Canada. They have an edge in goaltending. Could be the difference in the tournament. One question I wanted to explore, though, are Flyers fans rooting for Team USA? Talk about that a little bit after the break.
If it's happening in Philly sports, Colin Newby's talking about it. Go with him behind the scenes of legendary sports venues with the best athletes and the most iconic media personalities of the greatest sports city in the world.
What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome back to First Time, Long Time, where we're talking about the NHL Four Nations face-off and how international hockey really brings out the best in the game. But before the break, I asked, are Flyers fans rooting for Team USA? Philadelphia is an American city, would be why I brought that up. But if you look at Team Canada's roster, Canada being the international rival to the United States, you have Travis Konechny and Travis Sanheim, and then on Team Finland, you have Rasmus Ristolainen. Now, you do have John Tortorella, but are you really going to root for an assistant coach on Team USA? I mean, even if he was the head coach, it'd be a little bit of an awkward dynamic. But I think with the assistant coaching role, I wouldn't really say there's much of a Flyers rooting interest there. The reason that I think most people will root for Team USA is a little bit different than just regionalism, though. Because this is part of the draw of international hockey, and I believe this is why players take it so much more seriously than just some random all-star game. There is a lot more pride when you represent your country, and the patriotism that comes out of these guys, I have always really admired. One of the funny stories I think back to is in 2014, it was Slava Voinov, and this is before his domestic abuse accusations came up, while he was still playing with the Los Angeles Kings and one of their better defensemen. He matched up with Jonathan Quick in the 14 Olympic Games over in Sochi, and he's talking to the media, basically talking trash about his LA Kings teammate, his goaltender, and how he plays a little cheap around the rules. I thought it was funny and just really represented the intensity of hockey as a sport overall, because the jersey that you're wearing decides the allegiance that you have, but also just the short-term interest of representing your country, and Slava Voinov knowing that a few weeks later he'd go back to the United States and play for the Kings with Jonathan Quick behind him in the crease. So I think ultimately most Flyers fans, when I say Flyers fans, I'm kind of assuming Philadelphians are in the Philadelphia region and from the United States. Maybe I should expand that and just clarify the notion there. But I think most of those fans will end up rooting for Team USA because you begin to feel that kind of passion, at least if the international best-on-best tournament actually does its job and it's competitive enough to match up with some of the historical tournaments that I mentioned towards the beginning of the show. I'm sure there's other Flyers fans either in other parts of the world or of different nationalities that are going to root for different teams, and you probably will have at least some factions rooting for Konechny and Sanheim and possibly even Team Canada as a whole. But I want to fixate in on each of the three Flyers who are going to be suiting up in this tournament. And you can get this on 975thefanatic.com, a breakdown of each player and of John Tortorella. But it's under three Philadelphia Flyers selected to NHL Four Nations face-off rosters. This is the first time I'll be doing this, and possibly even the only time, where I am talking about an article before it's actually released, but the rosters don't become official until Wednesday evening. I am under the assumption that reports of these Flyers being named to the team are true. So I'm going to speak about it as if it's true and then add the link to the show notes after it does officially hit 975thefanatic.com. First Flyer I want to talk about is Travis Konechny, and this is an interesting name for a lot of reasons, because when you talk about the Flyers rebuild, you always hear about this lack of top-end talent. That's what the Matvei Mishkov pick was all about. Drafting him 7th overall, he was supposed to be more talented than that. Number 2 overall talent behind Connor Bedard. Slips to 7, and that's why the Flyers struck where they did. They took that big risk on top-end talent. They thought they needed to take the big swing for a guy that was going to be at the top of the lineup, not a more sure thing who could probably play in the middle of the lineup. But if you don't have top-end talent on the roster, it's weird that you get a forward named to Team Canada. I talked about it earlier. Look at some of the rosters they've had in the past. Look at that 98 roster with Wayne Gretzky as the star. And in a way, they used Eric Lindros as the centerpiece. So you have the best hockey player who ever lived on the team, but you were basing it around a different player. And then fast forward to now, you have Connor McDavid. Sidney Crosby's the grizzled vet. He's going to be one of the centerpieces on Team Canada. Nathan McKinnon, you're going to have Cal McCarr on the blue line. But Canada's loaded, and they always will be. So making Team Canada is really even more of an honor, and Travis Konechny has earned every bit of that, at least with his play in the past few seasons with the Flyers. Now, Konechny set career highs last year in 23-24. He had 33 goals and 68 points, but he could actually shatter both of those career highs this season. Currently on pace for 43 goals and 99 points. I know it's only through 25 games, but Konechny's just been on a torrid pace. And based on the merit and what kind of NHL season he's having, Konechny absolutely commanded a roster spot. Now, is that the best way to pick a team? Almost like an all-star selection? No, I don't think it is, because remember, with all-star teams, you're just trying to give that honor. You're trying to entertain the fans, give them what they want to see, and you're not necessarily picking a roster that's going to win a game, because the actual game or 3-on-3 tournament, whatever in God's name they do with All-Star Weekend now, that's just for fun. They're not competitive at all. Here, you have a different roster selection process. It's not merit. It's not who deserves it. It's who's going to help you win. Does Travis Konechny help Team Canada win? Well, I mean, he's going to help any hockey team win because of how skilled of a forward he is. But I do caution that he plays a very aggressive transition game that isn't really focused on defense. And when you have guys like the ones I mentioned, like McKinnon, McDavid, Cal McCarr, these guys are going to drive plenty of offense already. Konechny will need to show a little bit better of an all-around game. I think one of the reasons, though, that Team Canada might have picked him was to be a key penalty killer. Remember, Konechny led the NHL in shorthanded goals with 6 last season, and Brad Shaw got the power kill to really take off, and that was a big part of what kept the Flyers in the playoff race. So I think that ultimately might be his biggest contribution to Team Canada, might come shorthanded. And Konechny he's a London, Ontario guy. He starred in the OHL before the Flyers drafted him. He also represented Team Canada at the World Juniors, few other international tournaments along the way. I guess you could call Konechny somewhat of a surprise just because of the names I mentioned that are options for Canada, but he's not nearly as much of a surprise as Travis Sanheim making Team Canada. We're talking about a blue line here with guys like Alex Pietrangelo, Dougie Hamilton, and McCarr is probably going to be their best guy, and I'd imagine their top power play guy, possibly leader in ice time. But it speaks to how good of a season Travis Sanheim is having that he's anywhere near the conversation of the guys I just mentioned, Pietrangelo, McCarr, Dougie Hamilton. It's just incredible the leaps that this guy has made when about a year and a half ago, Danny Briere was trying to send him in somewhat of a salary dump to the St. Louis Blues. It would have happened if Torrey Krug didn't nix the trade with his no trade clause. But Sanheim, remember at that point, and gotten off to a little bit of a rocky start under John Tortorella. In their first season together with the Flyers, Tortorella didn't love Sanheim. I always got the impression that he thought Sanheim was being a little apprehensive. He's a very talented player. He's got the raw tools, as you're saying now, but I always got the impression from what Tortorella said that he just didn't think he was in attack mode enough. Well, Sanheim's really turned that around. He had an excellent season in 23-24, won the Barry Ashby as the Flyers' top defenseman, and that's a great honor, sure, but this season, in only 25 games, granted, But I think Sanheim really has hit that next level to the point where you can expect him to be a top pair defenseman on a consistent basis. So where he's been up and down the rest of his career, and you would say that these spurts come in small samples and maybe he's inconsistent, I don't think that's the case with Travis Sanheim here, and I think the world is going to find that out when they watch him play for Team Canada. This guy is so athletic in his skating stride that he just covers so much ground. He can jump into the play on offense. He can recover if the puck does go the other way defensively. And it takes unbelievable conditioning to do what he does also. Sanheim's 5th in the league in average ice time, but that also doesn't include the stretch there where he was logging even more minutes with injuries on the Philadelphia blue line. Remember, you had Cam York, Jamie Drysdale, Emil Andre missed a few games there, and Sanheim really took it and ran with it when there was extra minutes to go around. He jumped onto the top power play unit at that point too, and he's also been possibly Philadelphia's best penalty killer this year. They're ranked 3rd in the NHL, and he's been a huge part of that. So Travis Sanheim has been the workhorse that the Flyers have wanted him to be since he got drafted all the way back in 2014. And remember, he came out of the WHL, this tall, raw, good skating defenseman. He was a star for the Calgary Hitmen before that. So a long history up in Canada, played in the WHL for a while there, and now he's going to represent his country, the Four Nations face-off. Do I think he might be a healthy scratch? We'll see about that, but regardless, it's just a great honor for Sanheim to be there, and it's a great indicator for his professional growth also. Another guy with tremendous professional growth, Rasmus Ristolainen. Remember, when the Flyers got this guy a couple of years ago, he was polarizing to the fan base immediately. He was considered more of a bruiser when he was with the Buffalo Sabres, but all the analytics people didn't really like his defensive game, and you saw why right when he came to the Flyers. The guy chased the big hit a lot of times. I think he got out of position, especially early in his tenure, when he was trying to be a little bit too physical. And John Tortorella has kind of worked that out of him over time. John Tortorella discouraged from that right when he took over for the Flyers, kind of intended to change Ristolainen's game. And through the work of Brad Shaw, maybe I should give him a little bit more credit than John Tortorella, depending on how you want to divvy that up. But under Tortorella and Shaw, Ristolainen has become a much more defensively responsible player, and he's just more steady altogether with the Flyers. And for him to earn a spot on Team Finland is an honor, as it is for all of these players that are going to be competing in February. Now, I think the Finns are probably going to ask Ristolainen to play somewhat of a limited role. They've got some good defensemen on the team. Got Miro Heiskanen, Esa Lindell. Those guys are both going to play big minutes for Finland, but I think Ristolainen is playing possibly as well as he has at any point in his Flyers career right now. I asked John Tortorella last week about how Ristolainen is showing a little bit more confidence as a skater and probably doing some of the things that have rubbed off from Travis Sanheim, jumping into the play and using a long athletic stride to just cover a lot of the ice. Take a listen to what Tortorella said about Ristolainen. John, you talked a lot recently about how Sanheim jumping in the plays helped drive offense. Seems like Ristolainen's trying to do that a little bit too. How do you think he's gotten comfortable in that way during the
Yeah, the key with Risto, he's an average or below average player if he doesn't move his legs. And right now, that's all you see him do is escape and get us out of our end zone and join and forecheck and get involved in the offensive part because his legs are always moving. It's night and day. If he's just watching and not using his legs, he's not that good of a player. And it's not just tonight, but for the last little while, he's played very well for us.
So I don't know if it's really going to work out that that's going to be his game. The Finns might see Ristolainen's size. He's 6'4", and his history as a big hitter in the NHL. And he might play a third pair role. And these are, in a way, all-star teams. Yes, they're supposed to be competitive, but these are 4 teams made up of the NHL's best. So, yeah, you're going to have a ton of star power. But Ristolainen has had a little bit of a flair for the dramatic in the past. You trace all the way back to the 2014 World Juniors. Yep, 10 years ago. He gave Team Finland the gold medal win with an overtime winner against the Swedes. The World Juniors, that's another great international hockey competition. It's become even more popular. It always has been very popular, especially in Canada. I think it's spread to the U.S. and other parts of the world in the last maybe 5 years or so. But that's a huge goal on the international stage, too, for Ristolainen, and overtime winner to bring your country the gold medal. And he also represented Finland in that World Cup of Hockey, the last time the NHL sent their players to an international best-on-best. So we'll see what Ristolainen has in store on the world stage. And of course, all these guys are going to be competing against John Tortorella, who's going to be on the bench for Team USA. Now, Mike Sullivan is the head coach for the Americans, and he has those 2 Stanley Cups for Pittsburgh and one of the highest profile coaches in the NHL for good reason. He's had a ton of success in Pittsburgh, and it looks like they are in somewhat of a changing of the guard in that franchise. So you don't know exactly how long he's going to last with the Penguins. But for now, he is the bench boss for Team USA, and he has a previously existing long relationship with John Tortorella. He'll be on the staff. The other assistant coaches are John Hines from the Minnesota Wild, and then Pittsburgh assistant David Quinn. But Tortorella gets the call here. Remember, he's a Massachusetts native, and he's actually second all-time in victories among American board head coaches. Only Peter Laviolette, former Flyers coach, has more. So look out for Tortorella. He's not going to be the focus of this tournament like he is sometimes for the Flyers. I don't think assistant coaches have post-game media availability, so that's going to take a little bit of the spotlight off John Tortorella for once. But he will be up at those games. He'll be coaching in the round robin, looking at a few of his players, the current Flyers with Sanheim, Konechny, and Ristolainen. But this tournament should be something for all Flyers fans to look forward to. I certainly am looking forward to covering it when the time comes in February. This is just after the NFL season ends. You're going to get to tune into some international best-on-best hockey. So if you're not a fan of that,
I hate hockey and I don't like kids.
Sorry, and thanks for sitting through. First time, long time. I'll talk to you next week, Philadelphia.